There were 40 envelopes in a biscuit tin at the back of a wardrobe, all of them addressed in the same hand, all of them stamped and franked and posted, and somehow back in the tin, all of them unopened. The 11th one was addressed to me. I want to say at the beginning that I liked this job, and that I'm not telling you this to be unkind about the people whose houses I went into. Almost everything I am going to describe belonged to somebody who was, by the time I arrived, past being embarrassed about it, and I have never in my life felt entitled to be embarrassed on their behalf. There's nothing graphic in this. I never once saw anybody. That is not how the work goes. By the time we are called, weeks have passed and the house is empty in the only sense that matters. What I have, instead, is a ledger and a numbering system and an audit that I performed on my own time out of boredom, and I have not been able to put any of it down in 6 years. I cleared the houses of the dead for 11 years. Let me explain what that means properly, because the picture most people have is of a skip and 4 lads and a radio, and the actual work is nothing like that, and the difference is the reason any of the rules exist. When a person dies, their property has to go somewhere, and the mechanism for that is probate. If there is a will and there is family, the family generally deals with it, and if they cannot face it, they hire somebody like us and we work to their instructions, and it is a service industry job with a lot of tact in it. That was maybe a third of what we did. The rest was the other kind. A person dies and there is no will, or there is a will and there is nobody named in it who is still alive, or there is nobody at all. No spouse, no children, no siblings, no cousin anybody can find. That happens far more than people think, and it happens more every year, and there is a whole quiet piece of public administration built to handle it. In most American counties, the office responsible is the public administrator, sometimes called the public guardian. It is often an elected position. It is almost always underfunded, and its job is to step in and administer the estates of people who have nobody. They secure the property, they inventory it, they settle the debts, they make a genuine and legally defined effort to find heirs, and if after a statutory period nobody is found, the remainder escheats to the state. Escheat is a wonderful and very old word. It means that in the absence of any person with a claim, property reverts to the sovereign. It is in English common law before the 14th century, and it is on the books in every American state, and it is the reason that somewhere in your state's treasury there is a department holding money that belonged to people nobody came for. The company I worked for held the clearance contract for the public administrator in 3 counties. We were the crew that goes in. The company was called Halloway Estate Services, and it had been operating since 1947, 11 employees. A yard and a warehouse on the north side of the city with a portable building for an office, and a laminated notice by the door about a steel-toed boots that had been there since long before me. Our work fell into 3 parts. The first is securing. You go to a property, sometimes with a deputy present. You take possession of the keys. You change the locks. You photograph the exterior. You note the condition. You check the utilities. The second is inventory. This is the part I did, and it is the part that matters. Somebody goes through the entire house and lists everything in it. Everything. Not everything valuable, everything. A house that has been lived in for 50 years by a person who threw nothing away, will produce an inventory of 9 or 10,000 line items, and it will take one person 11 days. The third is clearance, which is the skip and the lads and the radio, and which is over in 2 days. The inventory exists because of the heirs. Somewhere out there may be a nephew in another state who is going to be found by a genealogist in 14 months. And when he is found, he is entitled to an account of what his aunt owned. And the account is the inventory. And if it is wrong or incomplete, or if things have gone missing, then the company is finished. And so is the public administrator who hired us. So the inventory is not a list. It is a legal instrument. It is the same thing as a chain of title, which is the documented sequence of ownership of a piece of property, and which is the only reason anybody can prove that anything belongs to them. We categorized as we went. 5 categories. Category 1, saleable. Category 2, donatable. Category 3, disposal. Category 4, hold for potential heir, which covered anything personal, photographs, documents, jewelry, anything with sentimental weight. And Category 5, the company manual, which was a spiral-bound thing from the 1980s with pages added to it in 3 different typefaces, defined categories 1 through 4 in a paragraph each, with examples. Category 5 was defined in 4 words. Consult before handling. Do not carry. That is all it said. The man who trained me was Thaddeus Bray, who everybody called Thad, and who had done inventory for Halloway for 26 years, and who was the only person I've ever met who could walk into a house he had never entered and tell you from the hallway roughly how long it was going to take. He was not a solemn man. He talked constantly. He had a running commentary on wallpaper. He was, in a house, the most cheerful person imaginable, which I didn't understand for about a year and then understood completely, because you cannot do 11 days alone in a dead person's home in silence and come out the other end all right. He trained me for 6 weeks, which for a job that is fundamentally about writing things on a form is a very long time. And on the 4th day, he gave me a card. Not laminated, a piece of index card, handwritten, folded once, and he told me to keep it in the back of my clipboard. And when I looked around the office over the following months, I found that every person doing inventory had one, and that they were all in the same handwriting, and that the handwriting was not Thad's. 6 rules. Rule 1. Photograph the room whole before anything in it moves. Rule 2. A lot number is assigned in the room where the item was found. Never afterwards. Never in the van. Rule 3. You do not work out of your partner's sight, and if you are working alone, you do not open anything that is closed. Rule 4. Anything bearing a name that is not the decedent's goes to Category 5. Rule 5. A Category 5 item is not carried out of the house by the person who found it. Rule 6. If it is not on the inventory, it does not go in the van. And if it is on the inventory, it goes. I read it and I said, most of this is just the procedure. And Thad said, most of it is. And then he said, and 2 of them are not. And I am not telling you which, because you will find out and you will believe it properly then and not before, which is, and I say this with affection, for a dead man, a completely rotten thing to hand somebody on their 4th day. I am going to go through the ones that are procedure, because you need to understand how sane most of that card is. Rule 1. Photograph the room whole before anything moves. This is standard practice in estate work, in insurance loss adjustment, in archaeology, and in crime scene documentation, and it exists because context is data. A ring in a drawer in a bedside table and a ring in a shoebox in a garage are different objects legally and practically. And once you have picked it up, you cannot put it back into its context. And no memory survives 11 days and 9,000 items. So the photograph goes first, always. And the photograph has the room's identifier written on a card in the frame. Rule 2, the lot number is assigned in the room. Same principle, one step harder. The number is what binds the object to the place. If you carry an armful of things to the van and number them there, you have 5 objects and 1 location, and you have destroyed exactly the information the inventory exists to preserve. It is the same discipline as an archaeological context number, and it is the same discipline as evidence bagging, and it is not negotiable in any serious operation anywhere. Rule 3, do not work out of your partner's sight. This one is about theft, and I want to be blunt about it because the industry does not like saying so. 2-person working is standard in estate clearance for the same reason it is standard in cash handling. It protects the client and, far more importantly to the person doing it, it protects you. If a nephew turns up in 14 months and says there was a coin collection, the only thing standing between me and that accusation is that somebody was watching me the entire time. The second half of Rule 3, that if you are alone, you do not open anything closed, is the version for when the company could only send one of us, which was often because 11 employees. If you are alone, closed boxes wait for a second person. You photograph them closed, you number them closed, and they are opened when there is a witness. 3 of the 6, and they are the spine of the discipline, and every reputable firm in the country does some version of all 3. That leaves rules 4, 5, and 6, and rule 6 is half procedure and half something else, and I did not see that for years. Now, I have to talk about what was actually in Category 5 because I have been circling it. Boards. That is the first thing everybody wants to know, and I am going to deal with it directly and then explain why it is the least interesting part. Spirit boards. Talking boards. The commercial ones, the printed ones, and a surprising number of homemade ones, painted onto card or burned into a board with a soldering iron, with the alphabet in 2 arcs, and the yes and the no in the corners. In 11 years, I inventoried by my own count 31 of them. Also planchettes, on their own, without a board, also mirrors with the backing scraped, also sealed correspondence, also a category of thing I do not have a good word for, which is objects with writing on them that is not meant to be read by anybody. Jars with labels, tins with dates, a length of curtain rail with 40 names on it in pencil. And I want to tell you what I actually think about the boards because I think it is important and because I spent 11 years around more of them than almost anybody alive, and I came out with a completely conventional opinion. They work. They just do not work the way people think. The mechanism is the ideomotor effect, and it has been understood for 170 years. The term was coined by William Benjamin Carpenter, an English physiologist, in 1852. And what it describes is that a person can produce muscular movement without being aware of intending it, and that this happens constantly and in all of us and is not a defect. The decisive demonstration was Michael Faraday's in 1853, and it is one of the most elegant experiments ever performed. table turning was a craze at the time. People sat with their hands on a table, and the table moved, and the participants were entirely sincere that they were not pushing it. Faraday built a simple apparatus. He took 2 pieces of card, laid one on the table and one on top of it, joined them with small rollers or rubber bands, and put a light indicator on the arrangement. If the table moved first and dragged the hands, the upper card would lag behind. If the hands moved first and pushed the table, the upper card would lead. The upper card led every time. The participants were pushing. They did not know they were pushing. When Faraday showed them the indicator and they could see the lag as it happened, the phenomenon stopped because they could now perceive what their own hands were doing and they corrected for it. That is the entire thing, and it has been replicated in laboratories ever since. And there is a very neat modern version of it that I find more convincing than any of the historical work. If you blindfold the participants at a spirit board and rotate the board without telling them, the messages become gibberish immediately and completely. The board only spells anything when somebody at the table can see the letters. I have found that this is the point at which people stop listening. So let me say the other half, because the other half is the interesting one. The messages are not meaningless. They come from somewhere. There is a body of published work now on exactly this, and what it suggests is that the board is a mechanism for getting information out of a person that they cannot get out any other way. And in some experimental setups, people at a board answer factual questions more accurately than they do when asked directly. So the board is not a telephone to the dead. The board is a device for allowing a person to say something without having to admit that they are the one saying it. I have inventoried 31 of them, and I have never been frightened of a single one. And I would say that to anybody, and I've said it in this room. What frightens me is the ledger. Category 5 items did not go on the ordinary inventory. They went to the store. The store was a room at the back of the warehouse, block built, no window, one door, a padlock, and a hasp of a quality entirely out of proportion to a company with 11 staff. Metal shelving on 3 walls. And on a table by the door, a ledger. Not a computer. A bound ledger, quarter leather. And it was the 4th of its kind. And the first one started in 1949. Every Category 5 item ever taken out of a house by that company was in that book. Date, address, decedent, description, and a lot number in its own sequence, prefixed with the letter C, and a final column, which had a heading on the printed page and which was empty on almost every line. The heading was released. I asked Thad about the store in my second year. He said, things go in. I said, do they come out at? And he said, they are not supposed to. And then he changed the subject, which he did approximately once a year, and which was therefore extremely noticeable. I want to give you 11 years in a paragraph, because the actual texture of this job was not eerie in any way, and I do not want to give you the wrong impression. Most houses are sad and ordinary. A person got old and could not manage the stairs and lived in one room of a house with 7. There is a chair with a groove in it. There is a calendar with the last entry in March. There are 40 tins of the same soup, because at some point, somebody could only remember one thing they liked. A significant minority are hoarding cases, and hoarding has been a recognized disorder in its own right since 2013, when it was separated out in the 5th edition of the Diagnostic Manual. Understanding it as a disorder rather than as a moral failing changes how you walk through a house. You are not looking at laziness. You are looking at a condition with a prevalence of somewhere around 2% of the population and an average onset in adolescence and a documented association with distress about discarding. And I've never once made a joke about one of those houses, and I never will. And some houses had been unattended for a while before anybody noticed. And the thing about those is not visual, it is the smell. And the smell is chemistry. Cadaverine and putrescine are real named compounds. They are diamonds produced by the breakdown of amino acids, and they are extremely persistent. And they bind into porous material, plaster, timber, carpet backing, unsealed brick. You can strip a room to the studs, and it is still there in the joists. And there is a specialist industry that does nothing but that. And we would call them and stand outside. That is the job. It is 11 days of writing on a form in a cold house with the radio on. I was in my 9th year when I did the audit. And I did it for the least dramatic reason imaginable, which is that a claimant's solicitor asked a question I could not answer. An heir had been found for an estate from 2004. Genealogists find them years later, and they are usually delighted and occasionally litigious. This one was litigious. His aunt's inventory listed a lot as transferred to controlled store, Category 5, which was the standard wording. And he wanted to know what it was and where it was, and whether he could have it. Entirely reasonable question. So I went to the store with the ledger and the lot number, and I looked for the object. It was not there. And the ledger line had a date in the released column and a signature. Now, a signature in that column should not have surprised me. There is a legitimate release procedure in the manual, a page and a half of it, and it is what happens when a court orders an item returned to a claimant. It requires the public administrator's countersignature, and it happens perhaps twice a decade. There was no countersignature, there was one name. So I did what I did, which was that I took 4 evenings and a spreadsheet, and I went through all 4 ledgers from 1949 to that year, line by line. There were 1,140 entries. I counted the objects on the shelves. I did it 3 times over 2 weeks because I did not believe myself the first time. 806, 334 entries with a date in the released column and nothing on the shelf. And every single one of those 334 was signed by the same person. The signature was legible. That is the part that I still find difficult, because a signature that you cannot read can be anything. This one was written in a careful upright hand, and it read clearly, E. Halloway. Eusebius Halloway founded the company in 1947 and ran it until his death, which was in 1981, and which I confirmed in a newspaper archive that afternoon and again the following week at the county recorder, because I did not trust the newspaper. The earliest release in his hand is dated the 9th of June, 1993, 12 years after he died. They continue at a rate of somewhere between 6 and 12 a year for the entire rest of the ledger. The most recent one, at the point I did the audit, was dated 7 weeks earlier, I took it to the owner, who was Eusebius Halloway's granddaughter and who ran the company from the portable building and who was one of the most straightforwardly competent people I've ever worked for. She looked at the spreadsheet for a long time, and then she said, "I know." And I said, "How long have you known?" And she said, "Since I was 26. And then she said the thing that I actually came here to tell you, which is why the rules are the shape they are. She said, "My father's view was that it does not matter who signs it, it matters who carries it." And then she explained Rule 5 to me 9 years late. A Category 5 item is not carried out of the house by the person who found it, because the person who finds a thing has a relationship with it. You have photographed the room it was in. You have written its number in the room where it sat. You know what was around it and who owned it and how it was kept. Nobody else in the world knows that, and nobody else ever will, because you are the last person who will ever see it in context. And she said, the ones who signed things out were always the ones who found them, every time. Her grandfather included, which is how the whole practice started, and which is a sentence I have thought about a great deal. So somebody else carries it. Somebody who does not know what shelf it came off in a stranger's back bedroom. And that person puts it on the metal shelving and writes the line and closes the book and goes home and does not think about it again, because it is a box. That is the entire mechanism. Break the relationship at the door. Now I have to tell you about mine. Odalis Verhoeven died at 79 in a 2-bedroom house on the west side, and she had nobody. Not nobody findable, nobody. The public administrator's office ran the full statutory search, and it came back empty. And I have done that job long enough to tell you that a genuinely empty search is rare, and that it is the saddest document produced by American local government. I did her inventory alone over 9 days in November. 4,216 line items. It was an ordinary house, kept well, cold, because the boiler had been off since August. On the 7th day, I got to the wardrobe in the back bedroom, and on the shelf above the rail behind a folded blanket, there was a biscuit tin. Rule 3. I was alone. Closed things wait. So I photographed it closed, and I numbered it closed in the room, and I put it aside, and the following Tuesday Thad came out with me for the afternoon so that there would be 2 of us, and we opened it on the bedroom floor with the camera running. Envelopes, about 40, ordinary ones, the sort you buy in a box of 100, all of them addressed in the same hand, which was hers, and I knew it was hers because I'd by then been reading her handwriting for 8 days on labels and lists and a recipe card. All of them stamped, all of them franked, with a cancellation, which means every one of them had gone into the postal system and been processed, all of them unopened. 40 envelopes, 40 different names, 40 different addresses across 5 states, all of them posted at some point over what the cancellation suggested was about 30 years, all of them somehow returned to a tin on a shelf in a wardrobe in a house where she lived alone. Rule 4. Anything bearing a name that is not the decedent's goes to Category 5, and that is 40 items. And it is one of the largest single Category 5 entries in the history of that ledger. And I remember Thad saying, quietly, "That is a bad tin," in a completely flat voice. And then I went through them to number them, because Rule 2, in the room, the 11th one was addressed to me. Not to my name, in the way a stranger's letter is addressed to a name. To me at the house I grew up in, on a road 1,100 kilometers from that city, in a state Odalis Verhoeven has no recorded connection to, and where I've confirmed she never lived and never owned property and never, as far as any record I can find shows, ever went. The cancellation was from March of a year when I was 14. I want to be careful here, because this is the moment where an account like this either stays honest or stops being worth anything. I did not open it. That is the only thing about that afternoon I am proud of. I sat on the floor of a dead woman's bedroom and I looked at my own name in a stranger's handwriting for what Thad later told me was about 4 minutes. And I photographed it and I gave it a lot number in the room it was found in, and I put it in the category 5 box. And then rule 5, which for 9 years had been the one on the card I understood the least, took the box out of my hands. Thad carried it. He carried all 40. He did not let me touch the box after that, and he did not make anything of it, and on the drive back he talked about wallpaper. That was 6 years ago. The lot is C1137-11. I have not been in that room since the day of the audit, and I did not work for the company after the following spring, and I do not want anybody to think that I left dramatically, because I left because my knees were finished. An inventory is 11 days of stairs. But I did the audit before I left, and I went through all 1,140 entries, and I have already told you what I found, and there is one thing I did not tell you. When I got to my own line, the released column was not empty. There is no signature on it. That column is still blank, and I have a photograph of it. But there is a date. It is written in the same careful, upright hand as the 334, and it is a date in April. And at the time I photographed it, that date was 4 years in the future. It is now 11 months away. I do not have an ending for this, and I am not going to invent one, because the whole reason I trust my own account of this is that I have never once let myself fill in a field that nobody gave me. An empty field is safer than a confident wrong one. Thad said that to me on the 4th day at the same time as the card. So here is what I actually have, stated as flatly as I can manage. There is a locked room with 806 objects in it and a book that says there should be 1,140. There are 334 release lines signed by a man who's been dead since 1981. The first of them written 12 years after his funeral. There is a company that has known this since at least the 1980s, and whose entire response to it is a handwritten index card given to every new person on their 4th day, and whose one substantive rule is that you do not carry out the thing that you found. And there is a line in that book with my name attached to it and no signature and a date on it, and the date is in April. I am not going back for it. I want to be extremely clear about that. I have thought about it constantly for 6 years, and I have never once got as far as the car. But I would like somebody to understand what the rule is actually for, because I didn't understand it for 9 years, and I think most people would hear it and think it was superstition. It is not about the object. It never was. It is that after 11 days alone in somebody's house, you are the last person on earth who knows where anything was. And when the shelves are cleared, and the skip is gone, and the locks are changed, that knowledge does not go anywhere. It stays in you. And a thing that only one living person knows the truth about is a thing that has, in every sense that the paperwork can recognize, exactly one owner. So somebody else carries it out of the house. somebody who does not know. And you go home and you do not sign anything.